Welcome to the discussion video on the computational part of the balance scorecard, performance measurement, and the performance report. So, under the balance scorecard, we have identified the four perspectives: financial perspective, learning and growth, internal process, and the customer perspective. So for this video, we will be focusing our attention on the financial perspective. Under the financial perspective, we look at the segments, we look at the responsibility centers at the financial sense. So under the responsibility accounting concepts, we have identified the four classifications of responsibility centers, such as the cost center, the revenue center, the profit center, and the investment center. So we are familiar with the cost, revenue, profit, and investment center. So what are the objectives of these centers? The objectives under the cost center is to minimize the cost. Under the revenue center, it is more of the revenue, the maximization of the revenue. Under the profit center, it is a combination of the cost and revenue. While under the investment center, it is a combination of the cost, revenue, and investment. So, by looking at how the objectives of the various responsibility centers are, we look at how we measure the performance of each responsibility center. So, how do we measure? How do we measure the performance of each responsibility center? Under the cost center, we look at the variances. Yung actual versus the budget. Since cost ang pinag-uusapan natin, if the actual cost is greater than the budgeted cost for that cost center, then it will yield an unfavorable variance for the particular cost center. So for revenue, we also use variances. So since revenue ang pinag-uusapan, if the actual revenue is greater than the budgeted revenue, then it is a favorable matter for the revenue center. Same is true under the profit center. If the actual profit is greater than the budgeted profit for that particular segment, then it is a favorable matter for the profit center. Under the investment center, since it is a combination of the cost, revenue, and investment, when you are looking at the cost and revenue, you are using variances also. But if you are looking at how well the investment center is performing, there are three performance indicators, such as the return on investment, the residual income, and the EVA, or the economic value added. So later we will discuss this. So the focus of our attention now, since variances for cost, revenue, and profit center has already been discussed in your lower level managerial accounting, since this is an update on managerial accounting, we will be focusing on the factors such as residual income, return on investment, and economic value added. One trivia. Among this cost, revenue, profit, and investment center, alin dyan ang hindi na ginagamit in practical sense or in actual practice? You look at the objectives. Pag tinignan mo yan, in actual practice, itong revenue centers is not used in actual practice. Why? Kasi if isa-isahin natin yung concept niya, under the cost center, merong mga responsibility center na nagge-generate lang ng cost, or disbursement centers. Just like for example, in CLSU, the accounting office. The accounting office is a cost center because it is a disbursement of the funds of a particular agency. However, profit center naman, for example, a particular segment, yung product segment or a particular product line, it incurs costs. However, it also earns revenues. Investment, for a particular company na nag-generate ng profit and then cost, and is also responsible for making investments, just like for example malls. Yung mga malls, they are generating revenue, they are incurring costs, and they are also responsible in making investments of its idle funds. However, in actual practice, revenue centers does not happen. Why? Because hindi naman pwede na you are earning revenue but you are not incurring costs. Remember the matching principle. You cannot earn. The conservatism and the prudence principle lies where you cannot earn revenue while you do not incur costs. You cannot earn revenue while you do not incur costs. However, yung cost, pwede kang mag-incur ng cost pero wala kang revenue. Looking at prudence and conservatism. So, this revenue is for theoretical purposes only. So, let me go back to the investment centers. Our focus of attention in measuring the responsibility center, specifically the investment center, is the return on investment, the residual income, and the economic value added. So, how do we compute for the residual return on investment, residual income, and the economic value added? Let us look at this. The formula in computing for your return on investment is your segment income divided by your investment. The formula in computing for your residual income is your sales minus total expenses is your segment margin minus your imputed interest is your residual income. So, isa-isahin lang muna natin yung formula. Yung economic value added is computed as your after tax profit minus your weighted average cost of capital times investment. The answer is your economic value added. So let us discuss this. The residual income is your sales minus your total expenses, the cost of goods sold, and the operating expenses yan. So, since we are looking at segments, we are looking at a particular responsibility center, it is called as segment margin kesa tawaging gross margin. So, segment margin ang gamit natin. The imputed interest, you will deduct it to the segment margin. What is the concept of the imputed interest? Ang sinasabi lang dito ay, since this is an investment, pwede kasi na inutang yung pera para doon sa pang-invest. Pwedeng gamit siya, kinuha siya sa retained earnings, or pwedeng nag-issue ng stocks or bonds. So, ibig sabihin, hindi siya libre. So, merong interest associated with the investment. So, under the concept of residual income, dapat lang daw na ibawas mo yung kung ano man yung imputed interest to arrive at the residual income. Okay, under the return on investment naman, we compute for what is the formula of return on investment? The net income divided by the investment. In this case, since we are looking at a segment or a particular investment center, gamitin natin yung segment income, or itong wag segment margin. You can also call this segment income. So ito 'yon. Yung segment income that you have computed by the formula sales minus the total expenses divided by the investment. Kung magkano yung investment, pwede rin itong contributed capital or pwede rin itong operating assets. So essentially, pag tinignan mo, return on investment, pwede rin siyang return on assets. Yung assets na kinontribute doon sa investment na yon na operating in nature. Kaya pwedeng investment, contributed capital, or operating assets. Okay, what is the concept naman ng economic value added na tinatawag? Well, economic value added is essentially residual income. However, economic value added is stricter in the sense that it incorporates the taxes na babayaran ng it incorporates the taxes na pwedeng bayaran ng isang particular investment. Ang konsepto kasi ng economic value added is there will come a time na there is a possibility na magbayad ka ng taxes because of the investment. So, i-incorporate na natin siya when we are computing for the particular segment or when we are measuring the performance of a particular segment. So, after-tax profit minus the weighted average cost of capital times investment. How do we compute for the after-tax profit? The after-tax profit is computed as your segment income. Yung na-compute mo dito kanina, segment income times the 1 minus your tax rate. For example, your tax rate is 30%, so 1 minus tax rate na 30%. So, your segment income times 70%. So, naka-incorporate doon. If the problem is silent, we will be using 30% as the tax rate. It is also prescribed and during the CPA board exam, if the problem is silent, we use the 30% tax rate for the CPALE. Okay, so when we get the after-tax profit under the economic value added, we compute for the weighted average cost of capital. This weighted average cost of capital is normally given, yung weighted average cost of capital na ito. So what is the concept under weighted average weighted average cost of capital? It only means that yung perang ginamit has been sourced in from various financing. Kumbaga, galing sa iba't ibang sources yung funds na ininvest dun sa investment center, kaya nagko-compute tayo ng weighted average of the particular funds times the investment. Ano tong investment na to? It can be your contributed capital, it can be your operating assets. So essentially, in many problems, the imputed interest and the weighted average cost of capital times investment are essentially the same. Ang pinagkaiba lang talaga nitong dalawa is the consideration for the tax. So let us look at how we can compute for this. Let us look at sample problem. So this is the sample problem. Sana nakikita mo the return on asset, the return on investment compared to your residual income. So the problem is return on investment versus RI versus isama na rin natin itong economic value added. So the sales given 675, cost of goods sold 400,000, operating expenses 237,500, total assets 750,000, the weighted average cost of capital 4%. There are notes. The average shareholders equity is 300,000 and the income tax rate is 40%. So let us look at how we can assess whether the investment center is performing well, whether the investment center should be closed out, or is operating above the standards. So ano ang uunahin natin? Siguro unahin natin ang pag-compute ng ating return on investment. So what is the formula of the return on investment? Balikan natin. The return on investment is your segment income divided by your investment or your contribution or contributed capital or your operating assets. So under ROI, the segment income, how do we compute for your segment income? How do we compute for your segment income? Ang sabi kanina, the segment income is computed as sales minus the total expenses is your segment margin or your segment income. So, magkano ang sales natin dyan? 675,000 minus cost of goods sold 400,000 minus OPEX 237,500. So your segment income is 37,500 divided by your investment or your operating assets. Since the given is total assets, we assume that this total assets has been used in the operations of the business. So what is the total assets? 750,000. So 37,500 divided by 750,000 is 5%. So return on investment is 5%. It only means na doon sa i-invest mo na 750,000, kung mag-invest ka ng 750, you will generate 5% of income on this. So let's look at the residual income. How do we compute for the residual income? Ang formula kanina is sales less the expenses is your segment income, then less your imputed interest. Ang segment income na compute mo na 37,500. So yung imputed interest, how do we compute for the imputed interest? The imputed interest is your investment multiplied, given the data, the investment here is, na ginamit mo dito is 750,000. So this is 750,000 multiplied to your interest. What is the interest rate we will be using? The weighted average cost of capital, 4%. So 750,000 times 0.04 is 30,000. So the imputed interest is 30,000. So 37,500 less 30,000 is 7,500. This is your residual income. Next, we look at your economic value added. The economic value added is computed as, ang sabi dito, balikan natin, the after-tax profit. Yung after-tax profit is computed as segment income times 1 minus the tax rate, minus the weighted average cost of capital times the investment. Ito, na-compute na natin because they are essentially the same given the problem. Okay, the segment income is 37,500 times 1 minus the tax rate. What is the tax rate? 40%. So 40%. So 37,500 times 60%. 37,500 times 60% is 22,500. You divide it with the not divide. You deduct the weighted average cost of capital times the investment na na-compute mo na kanina, 30,000. So this is negative. 22,500 minus 30,000 minus 30,000 is 7,500 negative. This is your economic value added. So since the economic value added is negative, what does it suggest? What does a negative economic value added suggest? Ang sinasabi lang dito, by incorporating the taxes, ibig sabihin, kapag negative ang economic value added, ay yung investment is not productive. considering the taxes that you will be paying and the cost of capital, hindi productive yung pursuit ng investment center mo na yan. So, if you are a wise manager, it is better for you to close the particular investment center dahil negative ang economic value added. Remember, ang sinasabi ng economic value added is the true economic value. Kung ano talaga yung value na binibigay sa iyo ng investment center considering the cost of capital, considering the taxes paid, and the amount of investment. Sinasuggest nito na negative ang ibinibigay niya sa yung value. So kung titingnan mo, the economic value added is stricter compared to your residual income because under your residual income, favorable kasi positive ang binibigay niya sa yung profit. However, under the economic value added, when we consider the taxes paid, negative na ang result niyan. Kaya it is better for the management to decide whether we consider shutting down the particular investment or particular segment or particular investment center. Okay. So that is the discussion on ROI, RI, and economic value added. So I think let me just include a discussion on what a performance report should when we prepare a performance report, papaano natin i-present yung isang performance report. Okay, dito na lang din siguro. So under the performance report, we'll look at medyo parang dumidilim, ano? Okay, let's look at how a performance report is prepared. We look at sales, cost of sales, less cost of sales is your gross profit. Then kapag nagbawas ka ng OPEX, that is your operating income. So ito yung basic income statement preparation or pro forma presentation. Sales less cost of sales is your gross profit, operating expenses, and then operating income. So ang goal natin ngayon is to identify how do we measure the performance of a particular segment or a particular manager o ng isang responsibility center using a financial statement. So kanina in-identify natin yung kung itutuloy ba ang isang investment center or not. But for this part, we look at how a performance report is used as a tool in measuring the performance of an officer of a particular responsibility center and a particular segment. So let us look at this. The cost of sales can be dissected into variable cost and fixed cost. Operating expenses can be variable cost and fixed cost. So using the concept of a performance report, we'll look at separating yung variable and fixed cost. So, i-separate natin yung presentation daw niya. So, sales, variable cost is your sales minus your variable cost is your contribution margin. And then, yung fixed cost naman, so lahat dito, variable cost, whether it is manufacturing or non-manufacturing, fixed cost, whether it is direct or indirect, isama natin dyan. Then, CM minus, contribution margin minus fixed cost is your operating income. Okay. So under the concept of analyzing a performance report, we look at a manufacturing or non-manufacturing variable cost and a fixed cost, whether it is direct or indirect. So ito na yung final analysis natin ng isang performance report. Ito na yung gagamitin natin. So sales, itong variable cost can be manufacturing or non-manufacturing. So, unahin natin yung variable manufacturing cost. So, variable manufacturing cost, sales minus your variable manufacturing cost is your manufacturing contribution margin. Then, kapag binawas mo naman dyan yung variable non-manufacturing cost, it is your contribution margin. So, essentially, ito pa lang yon. So, dinisect lang natin for performance report purposes. The fixed cost, we already analyzed this under our cost accounting and under the lower level managerial accounting that it can be dissected into direct or indirect cost. Yung direct cost, it can be controllable or non-controllable. So, yung direct fixed cost pwedeng controllable, pwedeng non-controllable. Yung indirect fixed cost naman, yan yung ina-allocate sa yung particular segment. So, under the contribution margin, ano ang unang ibabawas mo dyan? Your controllable direct fixed cost. Pag binawas mo yung controllable direct fixed cost dyan, you will get your controllable margin. Contribution margin minus the controllable direct fixed cost is your controllable margin. Then, ibawas mo dyan yung non-controllable direct fixed cost. Anong lalabas na dyan? Ang lalabas na dyan is your segment margin. Then, segment margin, ibawas mo na dyan yung indirect fixed cost, then makukuha mo yung operating income. So, ito pa lang yan. So, dinisect lang natin isa-isa. Sir, bakit kailangang i-identify mo yan ng isa-isang ganyan? Because in the CPA board exam, some items are asking for what is the amount of the manufacturing contribution margin. So, kung hindi mo alam yung concept na to, baka ang maisagot mo is your contribution margin. Because nalilito ka na, nagmamadali ka na, baka i-interpret mo yung manufacturing as the type of the business na ina-analyze mo. Ang ibig sabihin ng manufacturing contribution margin ay ang binawas lang doon sa sales is the variable manufacturing cost. For performance report purposes naman din, ano ang purpose nito? Anong pagkakaiba niyang controllable margin, segment margin? Well, remember, kapag performance, dalawa ang ine-evaluate mo. Yung officer, sir, sinong officer yan? Yung officer ng particular responsibility center, yung head ng responsibility center na yun. Yung head ng investment center, yung head ng profit center, ganon. Then, the segment. Ina-analyze mo yung officer at saka yung segment kung sila ba ay nagpe-perform. So, hindi pwedeng isang measure lang ang nandyan. So, kapag officer ang tinatanong, halimbawa in the CPA board exam, ang tinatanong is, what is the income that should be used in evaluating the officer's performance? Ano ang kukuhanin mo using the performance report template? Ang kukuhanin mo is the controllable margin. Sir, bakit yung controllable margin? Kasi yung controllable margin, it reflects yung items ng income at items ng expenses na under the control of the officer. So, hindi mo pwedeng i-evaluate yung officer sa mga bagay na hindi naman niya kontrolado. Hindi mo rin naman siya pwedeng bigyan ng rewards or incentives sa mga bagay na hindi niya naman pinagtrabahuhan. So, yun ang concept ng controllable margin. So, pag ganun ang tinatanong, the controllable margin is used as a basis in analyzing the performance of the officer. Same is true kapag segment margin naman, ang gagamitin kapag ang ine-evaluate is yung buong segment. So, ganun ang konsepto niya. Sir, okay, another question. Ano po ba ang example nitong non-controllable direct fixed cost halimbawa? Okay, let us analyze this first by making these statements. So, you analyze whether it is correct or it is not. All controllable costs are direct costs. Lahat ba ng controllable costs ay direct costs? The answer is correct. pansinin mo, lahat ng controllable cost na nandyan sa taas ay nandito sa taas ay direct. Ibig sabihin, it relates to that particular segment. Lahat ng controllable cost ay related doon sa segment na ina-analyze mo, ina-evaluate mo yung performance. So, all controllable costs are direct costs. That is correct. Baliktarin naman natin. All direct costs are controllable. All direct costs are controllable. The answer is false or mali. Mali. Tingnan mo. Lahat ba ng direct costs ay controllable? Hindi, kasi may non-controllable direct fixed costs ka dyan. Sir, anong example ng non-controllable direct fixed cost? For example, the depreciation of a particular machinery or particular equipment dun sa segment na yun ay direct kasi related yun dun sa mismong segment. But is it controllable? It is not. Hindi mo yun kontrolado. Kaya nandito yun sa non-controllable direct fixed cost. Next, yung for example, the salary of the officer. The salary of the officer, hindi niya yan kontrolado. So, pero yun ay direct doon sa mismong segment. So that is non-controllable but direct fixed cost. So please take note of this. So I think this analysis of the performance report ay magagamit mo in analyzing some items related to performance reporting, performance measurement, and the balance scorecard. So i-flash ko lang ng konti. So ayan siya. Performance report. So I think that ends the discussion for this computational part. Thank you.